voice of growth, mastering the mind and market. So my first reaction was shock. One moment to the next, he's gone. Courage is standing up for what you believe in. If you celebrated his death, you need to look inside of yourself, and you're immediately gonna have something inside you be triggered. But this has really tested my resolve to transform his message and amplify it. I'm cutting them off. Welcome back to the Voice of Growth podcast, where we help entrepreneurs and business leaders master their market and master their mind. My name is Manny Teran, and I'm your host. On today's podcast, we are talking about some recent events that have really blown open the door of some of the inner workings of human beings, has really shocked the world as to the level of violence that's being taken for your thoughts, for your ideas, for your politics. And that is, of course, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Now, I'm not going to get into his ideology. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what he was professing, what he believed was truth, what he believed was his path, his way. I'm going to talk mainly about what happened prior, what happens now. A lot of people have been fired. A lot of people are now dealing with the backlash of publicly celebrating the death of another human being. I'm asking you, if you are celebrating the death of this person whose role was to challenge people's ideas, whose role was to get people to critically think about lots of subjects, agree with him or not, if you celebrated his death, you need to look inside of yourself to see what that means in the general context of being a human being. I'm talking today about some Stoic principles. There's 4 major Stoic principles that I'll describe, and I'll give some context that'll help you as a business owner, as a business leader, make sense of what happened and make sense of what to do when these things occur, both specifically for this situation and beyond. Now, as a CEO, as a public leader, as a business leader, you have a duty to steer your company's ship correctly. You have a duty to your family, to your friends, to your community to act upon virtues, to not just stand there in the sidelines, but lean in when you have to. But there is a careful walk that you need to walk. As a CEO myself, I need to be careful of what I say publicly that is my personal opinion, and I make it very clear when I give my personal opinion versus looking at things like stoicism, like this situation for this podcast, plain as day on a table. So the 4 Stoic virtues are, the first of which is wisdom. Wisdom is having clarity of thought. Wisdom is drawing from your experiences and from learned and viewed behaviors and making informed decisions with calm and being collected. That's wisdom. The second of the virtues is that of courage. Courage is standing up for what you believe in the face of danger, in the face of humiliation. Courage really means going into that blazing fire even when you know you're going to get burned. The third is justice. Justice has to do foundationally on the truth. Justice has to do with people getting their due. Justice has to do with being fair and equitable with your discernment. And ultimately, justice has to be done and should be done in a forum, because we all bring our bias to the conversation. The last of which is temperance. Temperance is discipline. Temperance is controlling your impulses. Temperance is walking calmly. Temperance is pausing. I've been very vocal about my own challenges in life, and temperance is probably the one that I deal with the most. So if you think about these 4 virtues as elements of a car engine, the fuel injection, the pistons, all these pieces come together, but by themselves, they're not going to move anything forward. So there are three other elements, just like an engine needs fuel, spark, and oxygen. There's three elements in this framework that I describe that need to be put in place in order for those Stoic virtues to move anywhere forward. The first of which is spark. Spark, if you're listening to this podcast, you have the spark. Spark is life. Spark is that ability to breathe, to be in the moment, to be now. Number two is that of oxygen. In order to get things moving in an engine, you need oxygen, and oxygen is desire. Desire is fundamentally important to life, fundamentally important in living a Stoic life, because you need that desire to want to be a Stoic person, to want to lead that kind of life, that you need to have that as part of what you do. And the last of which was akin to fuel, that is execution. You need to execute. You can think about things, you can talk about things, but you absolutely need to execute. So spark is life, oxygen is that of desire, and fuel is that of execution. Those three things coupled with the four Stoic principles, and you're able to move forward. Now, you're going to have bad days. You're going to have awful days. You're going to do bad things. You're going to do wrong things. You're going to forget things. You're going to say too much. You're going to say too little. You're going to be a human being every single day. And every single day, you've got to rely on these four principles. Every single day, you need to decide whether or not you're going to have the desire and the execution to move things forward. You're going to make tons and tons of mistakes. Now, as a CEO, you first need to go back to the foundational level of being a human being. You watch that Assassination on TV, on social media, whatever, you hear about it, and you're immediately going to have something inside you be triggered. When I was on a phone call with somebody, they stepped away for a bit. I happened to have looked at my email, and I happened to have passed by Facebook. And I had some friends that were actually at the event 15 feet away from what happened. And they posted something on there. And I thought to myself, is this real? And then the gentleman came back. I let him know about what happened. And we both were a bit in shock. So my first reaction was shock that at a public rally, we resorted to political violence. Political violence has no space in this world. We're done with that. We should have been done with that in 1776. That should have been the end of it. But yet here we are. This is 2025, and we're dealing with political violence, and it has become a hotbed. On both sides of the aisle, there is sort of very strong language. There's conversations happening on social media threads that I'm just disgusted at. There's celebrations of somebody's public death. That's just, I can't even fathom what that is and why we're here. Leaning back on what I was talking, as a human being, we have our own visceral reaction to that. The next level is, how do we react? I've mentioned in the past that I've struggled with reacting too quickly. So my element there is to pause. So I invite you, when these things happen in the world, to pause and to reflect and to lean on that temperance, to figure out before you give a reaction to something, you instead sit in your calm, sit with the situation, and you respond when the time is right. You respond to your children, you respond to your spouse, you respond to your family, you respond to your employees, you respond to your community about how tragic something like that is. And that's based on the foundational level. Then you, as a CEO, need to state your intentions, your values, your mission, your vision. That should be something that you do all the time. So when something occurs where maybe one of your employees is publicly celebrating the death of another human being, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will tell you, you need to lean on your values. If you value that sort of reaction, if you value completely open, transparent, 100% raw emotion to come out however it comes out, then that's your value. But if you value some virtues and truth and being a responsible and a grounded human being, then you might want to say something. Now, you might want to say something in private, or you might want to say something in public. That's all going to depend on your core values. I know what I would do. I know where my values lie. Where do your values lie? Ask yourself that question. And then if you think about beyond the temperance, beyond that initial response, think about the side of justice. How do you condemn? Do you condemn that situation? How do you judge that situation that might have happened? Not necessarily Charlie Kirk, what happened there, but your employee's response to that. How do you judge that? And how do you expect your peers, people that report to you, people in adjacent communities, people, your vendors, if they are publicly proclaiming the death of somebody, you need to be the judge of leaning back on your virtues, leaning back on your vision, on your values. How do you deal with that? The next level is courage. Courage is the ability to stand your ground, make that public decree condemning whatever might have happened and standing by it no matter what. I have seen in my day instances where people were fired for telling their opinions. Now, it was not my role. I might have had an opinion about them being fired. I might have had an opinion for their opinion, but I was not in charge. I was not the leader when that happened. They were fired for saying their opinion, and it eventually blew over, but it did leave a lasting mark in my mind of the sort of person that was the CEO of that organization. And I ultimately wanted to get as far away as that person as I possibly could. And I did. So your forum, your stance on things will indelibly mark your employees, your community at large. So be aware and be ready, be courageous in that modality to understand what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and how you're going to live with the backlash. And then, of course, the next level is that of how, as a Stoic, how as a person that is leading your organization, how are you going to be and show wisdom? Wisdom is something that comes sometimes with age, not all the time with age. I know very wise 20-year-olds, and I know very unwise 60-year-olds as well. And there's a spectrum. And wisdom is a continuum. It's not a black or white. There is a continuum. And the more wisdom you gain in life, the better you are prepared, the better you are to live a life of joy, of calm, of peace, of prosperity, of abundance. I 100% ascribe to that modality. I have people in my life that I've known that are highly successful. They have tons of money. They have a 12-car garage. They have Ferraris. They have all this land. They have all these material goods, but inside they're rotten. Inside they're scared. Inside they're upset. They live a world of arrogance, and they believe that they are a bulldozer and everything they see becomes something to bulldoze. That is not what we talk about in this podcast. That is a different podcast. That is a different framework. We're interested in living a very successful life with tons of abundance, tons of wealth, both material and internal, both that of virtue and that of living a good life. That's what I'm talking about with abundance. What worth is it to have all this material good if you are pissed off inside, if you don't sleep well, if you just use people like they're Lego bricks and making some crappy mansion out of their toil, their hard work? No, that's not where we're about in this podcast. So let me give a few topics regarding Charlie Kirk himself. Charlie Kirk was extremely courageous. He actually gave several speeches about courage. And this is something that I believe needs to be taught to our children, because courage, just like wisdom, just like temperance, and just like justice, is something that is beginning to float away just like the sands of time. We're not teaching our children these virtues. We're teaching them lots of things about diversity, about acceptance, which is great. I'm all for that. But we also need to be teaching them about really what it takes to be a virtuous person. There's something that Charlie said that was very, very close to my heart, because I've had to stand up and be courageous at the face of people spreading lies, people telling half truths, or people just trying to hurt me. I've dealt with it. But this is something that he said. He wanted to be remembered for his courage, for his faith. That to me means, and I've actually heard when he gave this speech, is really comes down to he believes so strongly in his faith that he is willing to stand in front of crowds to be humiliated on a daily basis. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could stand in front of a crowd and be mocked and be talked about at different levels. And of course, his tragic death and then people celebrating that. Imagine his family, imagine his close friends, imagine people that are around him, how they feel that his message is going to be squashed by a gunman's bullet. The truth is that that bullet, as tragic as it is to have pierced his neck, is going to transform his message and amplify it. And it will take and is taking on new life. I've mentioned before that I have friends on the extreme left and the extreme right. And right now, my social media is being lit up by both sides on what happened with this situation. And I am disgusted. Literally, my stomach turned watching people that I know personally celebrate and basically say, well, he got it coming. He had it coming. He had it coming. What I don't like a lot of things about both sides, but one of the biggest things I don't like about the left is they're all for diversity. They want to celebrate it. They want to clap their hands and sing kumbaya about it. But they don't like diversity of thought. When you disagree with somebody, it somehow cuts down to the core. I disagree with a lot of people. And if I see somebody who's disagreeing with me, that's fine. I can still go have a beer with them. I can still hang out with them. I can still be friends with them. But this has really tested my resolve. And these people in my life that are celebrating, I am really contemplating my own decision and how to deal with that. I'm at this very level removing myself from the conversation. I'm not being involved with them. I'm not going to reach out to them. I'm just step back. On a larger level, I need to decide if they will remain as part of my circle. I've told you before that I celebrate my own diverse network because I want to reduce my bias. I want to look at things from different perspectives. This, however, has become very difficult. And what's happening in my life is a millionfold out there, a billionfold. Everybody else in the world is deciding for themselves how they see the situation, whether they celebrate it, whether they condemn it, whether they're middle of the road, take it or leave it. Opinions and their thoughts are what they are, but you as a virtuous CEO need to decide what you're going to do about that. As you're doing business with an organization, you need to decide that if you hear their CEO make mention of what happened in a way that you don't believe aligns with your values, then you need to figure out if you are going to spend your money and give them the business. Simple as that. Now, because I do celebrate free speech, let them talk. Let them say what they say. I think that there's nothing wrong with voicing your opinions, but it always comes back down to your own values. If it crosses your own values and you're doing business with this person or this organization, then you decide, is this something you're aligning with or not? I know for me, if I'm dealing with one of my organizations that is doing business with somebody who is publicly celebrating the death, the assassination of somebody, I'm cutting them off. That's me. You yourself need to make that decision for yourself. A few more things to talk about here before I wrap up. And I wanted to do this podcast because it's been kind of burning at me for the last few days, because I'm 20 years older than Charlie, and I think about his young children. I grew up without a father. My father died when I was 1. He's got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I think about what their life will be like, how much it will have changed because of his ideas, because of his voice, because of his courage to stand for what he believes in and stands for something that he believed was bigger than himself. He leveraged his faith. He was excited to meet his maker. He met his maker, and we're here now having this public, global conversation. There are things happening across the pond, big protests. There are people that are trying to figure out what's happening. I have friends across the world. I made a few phone calls over the weekend and just learning about their perspective. A lot of people thought he was a political figure. They thought he was more like a politician than somebody who was just getting other people to think clearly. A few things here to think about on, if you take your step back and looking at the actual act of violence, what happened. Stoic principle, this was out of your control. As crappy as it is out of our control. Now, you can blame guns, you can blame a bunch of stuff, but fundamentally, you weren't there to control what happened. So fundamentally, that is sort of level 1 stoicism right there. Number 2, on courage and living in accordance to virtue. Charlie stood up for what he believed in. He stood his ground. He voiced his voice. There was no question of where he stood on certain things. He made that known, and he paid the ultimate price for it. We've talked about the idea of premeditatio malorum, which is the premonition of evils, which is essentially being prepared for the worst. I believe that he knew every time he took that stage, he was not only going to be dodging verbal darts, verbal bullets, but he actually would also maybe be dodging real bullets. And we know where that left. Responding with virtue when confronted with grief and anger. If you fail in temperance, you're going to react. You're going to spew venom from your mouth. You're going to incite higher and higher levels of violence in your own mind that may lead to physical violence. Leaning on your virtue of temperance needs to be grounded and be a place where you pause before you react. You instead pause so that you can respond. Number 6, on the role of public discourse, free speech, and the real dangers of polarization. There is a big lesson here in public discourse. We, as human beings, with the advent of media, the standard media, with the advent of social media, are now basically stoking the flames of polarization. People are amassing to the two sides. People are digging their heels in and closing their ears. They don't want to hear the other side. They just don't. It's up to us as Stoics. It's up to us as business people that want to live this sort of virtuous life. And it's up to us. It begins with us to open up our own ears to listen to the other side. We lead by example, mainly in life. Leading by example, having those conversations with people, truly listening to understand, not listening to respond. And that is where it starts. It then continues with the greater conversation you might have with your employees. It continues with your values, your mission, your statement, all that going out. It continues with conversations with your vendors. And if you have a public position in your role, it needs to be done at a public forum. It goes back down to that. We need to be careful of polarization because nothing good comes from closing your ears, opening your mouth, and in this case, locking a bullet into a chamber and letting it fire. It's disgusting. Number 7, legacy is not up to us entirely. We wake up every single day not knowing if it will be our last. We believe it will continue. We believe we're going to wake up tomorrow. We believe that we're not going to die in the next 20 minutes, but you don't know. Charlie Kirk stood up there. He sat down that day. He put on his socks. He lived his life. He was answering questions, and one moment to the next, he's gone. He bled out. They did their best, but he was gone probably 3 minutes after he got shot. There was no turning back. I know people said he was stabilized at the hospital. I just think they were waiting for telling the family that what had happened, the full family. And then the idea of being able to accept, as hard as it is, that death is a natural part of what we call life. That's number 8. Being able to make sense to death. And as senseless as it was and as it is, the sense that we can derive from that event and what happened in his death, we need to internalize it and we need to live forward in life. Don't use it as an excuse to go down the drain. Don't use it as an excuse to spew violence out of your mouth or out of your hands. Use it as your own fuel for deepening understanding, for reaching across the aisle, for loving thy neighbor, for giving some grace in the face of disgusting conversations happening on social media and in person. I learned this morning of an event that took place where public officials were celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. It goes back down to what I started this off with. Does that align with your values or not? When I heard that, it did not align with my values. My value is that every human being that wants to stand and be heard should have that ability. Even the people that Charlie himself was debating against, if you really watch his narratives, if you really watch his conversations, he gave them quite a bit of grace. For being beat up and being thrown arrows at constantly, he gave them grace. He gave them the ability to share their opinion. He asked questions. Was he misogynistic? Was he racist? Was he divisive? That's for you to decide. Or was he challenging people's thoughts? Was he asking for clarification? Was he getting people to think more clearly about their own decisions and standing by them? That's for you to decide as well. And so I'll end today's podcast with just some thoughts about what strategy you'll take about something like this and what strategy you'll implement from it. What concepts will you actually go through and implement? I have a tendency to internalize things. I think about things. Others tend to think out loud. It's just easier for them to talk out loud. I start off internally thinking about things. Then I spend time with my partner, and then she's more of an outward thinker kind of person. So we kind of hash these things through. Then I had conversations with my kids, and I asked them their opinions about what happened. And I was careful to listen. I was careful to not give a response that was going to be heavily biased. But I was glad to hear that they both agreed with my values. And so as a parent, you always want, one of the gifts that you give your children is the gift of your values, plus or minus, whatever that might be to you. My values align with the fact that his death was tragic and senseless. My kids agree to that. And so I We'll have conversations with my coworkers, I'm sure. And I need to be careful as CEO how much I lean in and how much I say about my values. But I'm not going to hide the fact that I think it was a terrible thing that happened. Now, how we deal with it? Should the killer get the death sentence? Should he face a public trial? Should we castigate his family for not raising him better? Should we castigate society for feeding him this narrative? Should we castigate the gun industry? There's a lot of people that want to blame all these things. He was a lone gunman, so we know. There's also a lot of things with respect to some fishy things that were involved. And so, at least from where we see on the outside, the conspiracy theorists are revving up their engines and there's lots of things going back and forth. At the end of the day, he's dead and we're dealing with these things now. Some form of the truth will come out and we all hope and pray that justice will be served and we can take a step forward in humanity and act with our virtues, act to our truth, and be just and show temperance in how we react and how we deal with these things. Thanks very much. Cheers.